Everyone, I'm Dean Obidala, and welcome to tonight's Dean Obidala Show on Sirius XM Channel 127, Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. I say the year because it's important, because that's the year, you look at the calendar. When you look at voting rights right now, it's actually 1965, pre-August 1965. And why does August 1965 matter? Because that's when the Voting Rights Act was passed and signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson. This is not an exaggeration, and I'll describe it now, and I'll describe it in even more detail on my radio show tonight. In August 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was first signed into law, Black Americans had more protections then against voter suppression than they do today, July 14th, 2021. And this because of one reason and one reason only, the Republican Party. There's no exaggeration. It is because of them. It is their rejection of democracy and their goal is to suppress the vote of Black Americans and now brown Americans and lower income white Americans and anyone who doesn't support them. That's the reality. So let me explain briefly here. And again, I'll go in more detail on my show. The struggle for voting rights did not begin in the 1960s. It's even in the 50s. It was talked about Martin Luther King's famous speech in 1957, give us the ballot, give us the ballot. Then it took really in earnest during what we know as the Civil Rights Movement, the early 1960s. The Civil Rights Act passed in July 1964. At the time, President Johnson said to Martin Luther King, we can't do a Voting Rights Act right now. We just passed the Civil Rights Act. Martin Luther King would not listen. He went to the streets. So did numerous other African-American activists and white allies as well, took to the streets. We had the famous Selma March in 1965. Before that, in the years leading up to that, numerous people, African Americans specifically, but even white allies, were killed by white supremacists in the South because they simply wanted to be able to allow Black people to register to vote and actually cast their ballot and have their voice heard. In fact, the Selma March was because Jimmy Jackson was killed by white nationalists and white supremacists in the South. That led to the famous march, March 7th, 1965, across the bridge. We all know John Lewis beaten almost to the edge of his life. And then Martin Luther King did another march not long after that. Following the steps, they did not turn back. They went from Selma to Montgomery. A short time after that, Lyndon Baines Johnson supported the idea of a Voting Rights Act. And it was signed in August 1965. This law was landmark. It was more than iconic. It was groundbreaking that it offered federal protection for people to vote. Specifically for Black Americans, that's what was going on then. It made it illegal for certain things like literacy tests. In the original law, which is so relevant now because it's gone, it required pre-clearance or pre-approval by the Department of Justice or a federal judge for any laws that were wanted to be passed in states that had a history of discrimination that were covered by the Voting Rights Act. In fact, it even went beyond laws. Any changes to the voting regime, including closing polling stations. So that was in effect August 1965. Also, it's Section 2 that was fully and robustly protecting people apart from the pre-clearance part. Well, in 2013, the Republicans, after numerous efforts to gut the Voting Rights Act, found a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, Shelby County versus Holder, at the time Attorney General Eric Holder. And they succeeded because the 5-4 decision by the GOP-controlled Supreme Court ended pre-clearance in an abomination of a ruling where they dismissed reality and essentially said there's no such thing as discrimination against Black people now for voting, that the formula of the Voting Rights Act was out of date and had to be updated, but in reality, they're denying reality. Done. They said, oh, Congress, you can fix the bill. It never happened because Republicans would never let it happen. So in 2013, you gutted the most important part of the law, pre-clearance, meaning before the law could go into effect, it was stopped. Numerous times stopped, even in the weeks and months right before the Supreme Court decision in 2013, the DOJ was stopping actions by Republican legislatures to discriminate against Black voters and as well brown voters as time went on, and not just Black voters. Numerous laws went into effect. In fact, within hours of the Shelby County decision in Texas, voting ID requirements that were previously banned by the Voting Rights Act, by the Department of Justice, they enacted. They knew they were discriminatory, but they put them there anyway because they were trying to go back to Jim Crow. They were trying to go back to the time where white people ruled without any challenge of Black voters. Then that was bad enough. A few weeks ago, the GOP Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, Branovich versus DNC, Justice Alito wrote an opinion. Anytime Alito is writing anything, it's horrible. And made Section 2, which was still standing, essentially change the balance of power in that, making it even harder, if not impossible, for someone to prevail. So the reality is, as we sit here now, the Voting Rights Act that people literally put their lives on the line for and died for is gone. It barely exists. It's on paper only now. That's where it exists, the only place, not in the real world. This is what the Republican Party wanted. It's an insult to all of those who died in the civil rights struggle, all the black activists and their white allies who were murdered. Now we have no voting rights protection. You still have the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, but you had that before the Voting Rights Act as well, and it was meaningless because to enforce that is much harder. The Voting Rights Act made it much easier to enforce. And that's why when I say that Black Americans had more protection for their right to vote in August 1965 than today in July 2021, it's not an exaggeration. It is the sad, tragic reality of where we stand as a nation, thanks to one party, the GOP, the white nationalist fascist movement that has rejected democracy. And it is frustrating to see them succeed. It is even more frustrating because Democrats, we have the power to enact the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to end that, to put the teeth back in the Voting Rights Act and do more. But because of Democrats in the Senate who want to end the filibuster, we can't. We cannot do this. So Democrats are complicit in the Senate for not protecting the rights of Black people, Black Americans to vote. They should be talking about this every day. I don't want to hear about infrastructure. I don't want to hear about marijuana legalization. I want to hear about one thing and one thing only, protecting the right to vote, because that is the lifeblood of our democracy. Without that, nothing else matters. Look, the last time we had the House, the Senate, and the White House, Democrats, 2009 and 10. It took 11 years later, which essentially is a generation later, to get control again. If we do not pass these voting rights legislation, we will not get control of the three branches again, the two branches essentially, again for more than a generation, maybe 2 or 3 generations, who knows when. And there'll be no excuse. And while the Republicans are going to Republican, they're going to voter suppress, they are a white nationalist party, the frustration is that Democrats have the power. And we need Chuck Schumer to talk about this nonstop. President Biden talked about it yesterday. It's time to talk about ending the filibuster, pressuring your Democrats by name to end it. If not, then all the civil rights activists who've given their lives, who were killed and murdered simply for registering to vote, simply for voting, simply for being allies to the Black community, they died in vain. And that blood will be on the feet of the Democratic Party, not just the Republican Party. They don't act. So I'll talk about that more in my show. My show is live 6 to 9 p.m. on Sirius XM channel 127. If you don't subscribe to Sirius XM, go to the website. There are free trials. Do a free trial. Tune into my show, channel 127, Progress. Call in, be a part of our family. We have so much work to do. You can see it now. And now is the time to get that work done, not 2 months before the 2022 election. It is now. Let's get the work done. If you want progress, stay active. And no better place to stay active than on our show with fellow progressives and Democrats of all stripes fighting the good fight every day. And we're going to make a difference. Thanks for tuning in.